Now we have Johnny Alvis. I've not got a wee intro sheet from Johnny, but we've known Johnny and his family for some time. Johnny manages the cows at the Alvis Brothers business, and with ably helped by Joe and the family. So Johnny today is presenting us with the paper Achieving More from Less with Dairy and Arable Collaboration, and he's jointly sponsored by the Trehane Trust and the Dartington Cattle Breeding Trust. So everyone, a round of applause for Johnny Alvis.
Your Royal Highness, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. Before I start, I'd like to thank the Trehane Trust, the Dartington Cattle Breeding Trust and the Nuffield Farming Scholarships Trust for supporting my Nuffield year. I would also like to mention the Mercer family for their support of my Global Focus Tour, but there'll be more of that to come later on. None of this would have been possible without the support of my family and my staff back at home. They have enthusiastically supported and encouraged my time away, and I cannot thank them enough. My study topic, Achieving More from Less, seemed a straightforward topic. It stemmed from our building a new dairy, and in order to make the asset work harder, we would bring food in and take manure out to the arable land, which was growing maize and grass to feed the cattle. We have a machine capable of milking about 2,500 cattle, but only 200 hectares around the dairy. And this strategy would make the most of some expensive machinery and infrastructure that we had. On my study tours, I visited America, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland and Poland, and some other sites within the UK. I chose these countries for their varying dairying styles and their arable enterprises to see if there were some relationships between the two types of farming that could be developed and incorporated into our system in the southwest of England. In looking for some good examples of collaboration between livestock and arable farms, I came to a number of realisations fairly early on. Farmers are probably the best people at helping each other out in a crisis. Having said that, a lot of farmers the world over want to do their own thing. There are clearly some benefits from the two sides of farming working together. There's some technology that can be taken from the arable side and used in the dairy side. And there are some pig-headed organisations and individuals that couldn't possibly, however hard they try, work with anyone else. I did come across one or two of them. There are a few formal agreements between farms which operate for much more than a particular growing season. Most of these agreements rely on the goodwill and the financial viability of both the parties involved. One particular agreement which required a lot of trust and transparency from the participants was in New York State. Bill Morgan milks 1,600 head of cattle, and half his feed is bought in and half is grown on his own farm. The food that's brought in from a neighbour is grown on a 4-year rolling contract, and it's based on the margin the grower makes on a crop of maize for combining. So if, for example, the grower's 4-year rolling average for growing maize corn was $200 a hectare, after all his costs, then that is what Bill was having to pay. However, this sort of relationship does require transparency between both parties. Bill was picking up the harvesting costs and the seed costs, and the problem he was also having was removing a lot of his manure from his farm because there was none going back to the grower. Another agreement was the Wheatfield Grain Company. They've created a silage and high moisture corn contracting program. This is primarily targeted at the dairy industry, although other livestock users are part of it. This allows the dairy farmer and the grower to be completely and thoroughly independent of each other. They're able to sell and buy their crop when the price is most beneficial to them, and all contracts are through the company. Not all the crop is harvested as high moisture or silage. Some of the maize is left in the field and combined conventionally. This dry corn harvest is then used to determine the potential yield and hence the final price for the crop. Crops are sold unharvested, and the purchasing farm has to cover the harvesting costs and any repair to the land incurred during harvest. In this way, the purchaser is able to harvest at whatever stage of crop maturity he wishes. But only farmers who are happy to have their crops harvested by this method can join the scheme. I saw good evidence of this working in the States, but I'm not sure it would work here in the UK for maize. By and large, it's grown for silage and not for combining. But there is a potential that it could work for wheat or barley. This contract arrangement still doesn't remove any of the manure from the dairy to the arable ground, and growing continuous maize leads to one particularly large dose of manure pre-cultivations and not several doses throughout the growing period. A good example of systems working together was the hoop beef system, and I'm sure you'll hear more about this tomorrow. This system was providing buildings and in-calf suckler cattle that go onto corn farms. They have seen a benefit of $55 per hectare by the removal of corn straw for bedding, the accurate application of manure from the cattle. The farm's saving has come from increased soil organic matter, as we've already heard about this afternoon, resulting in less nitrogen and compound fertilizer being used. They've also gained slightly on the yields. They reckon they are better off to the tune of $55 a hectare, which might not seem a lot, but at 1,600 hectares of corn that they were growing, this has raised them $88,000. And application and machine costs were just about $25,000 a year. This was leaving them better off to the tune of $63,000 a year. From a dairy farmer's point of view, a ready supply of heifers onto an arable farm on a growing contract may be a way of moving cattle away from the dairy, releasing more land for milking cows, and putting these cattle directly onto the arable farms where the manure is required. One issue that cropped up time and time again was the removal of slurry from these large dairies. One particular area I visited in the US had major phosphate and potash issues, and this is something we need to avoid at all costs. I was with Dr. Victor Cabrera, who's an agricultural extension officer and lecturer from Wisconsin University. He was working with farmers where the US Department of Ag had been drilling wells on their land. These wells were to test for water contamination, and they were leading to a number of striking and pretty horrific revelations. In some cases, the high P and K levels had led to a 6-year ban on all the phosphates and potash applications, and that was a ban on both organic and inorganic applications. This was resulting in some manures being chucked up to 20 to 30 miles away from the farms to get them to areas where they were allowed to spread. Groundwater was being tested monthly during the summer and winter and weekly during the spring and fall. Whilst nitrogen was also measured, it was not seen as too big an issue, as a year's ban on nitrogen would render the soil's nitrogen level down to a suitable target, and particularly after the following harvest. More worryingly, they were also testing for herbicides, pesticides, antibiotics and estrogen, and these were all found and linked back to the dairy farms in question. There are some ideas from the arable area that could be taken and moved to the dairy sector. I visited the Burney campus at the University of Tasmania. This houses the Cuthbertson Research Laboratories, and they're run by the Institute of Agricultural Research. Dr. Hill and Dr. Rawnsley have taken the technology that is currently used for green sensing. That's the top picture. It's used for green sensing in arable stubbles, and they have developed that in the grazing sector. Currently, the technology is used to measure the green fraction in stubbles and only spray where there is green growth and not where there's bare ground. This has resulted in a saving of up to 90% in spray whilst maintaining 100% green kill. And the picture at the top there actually is taken of an evening. It's not setting the place on fire. It's taking of an evening so you can actually see the lights working and the detection working. And that picture was taken at about 25 kilometres an hour. So it's quite a quick process. Hill and Rawnsley have taken this technology and fitted it to a sprayer, applying liquid fertiliser to grazing ground, and particularly where cattle have urinated. This has created a dark ring, and the nozzle is switched off. This has resulted in a 40% saving in nitrogen on highly grazed paddocks, but 0% loss in production. And when I was out there, they were just taking this trial work into the field, from the testing station into the field. So there is work being done on this at the moment. They're hoping to use the same sort of technology with slightly different algorithms as well to pick out grassland weeds in grassland. So they're detecting a different type of green. They will be using the same machinery, but a different type of green they're looking for. This sort of technology, though, is bound to be expensive and maybe the preserve only of contractors and large farmers. If we could cut our fertiliser use by 40% at home, it'd probably save me £3,500 a year. Or, in other words, I could take my wife and myself to Australia for a month. The current interest in heavily grazed New Zealand-style milk production in the UK could well benefit from this type of machine. The precision ag movement that has swept the arable sector with GPS steering and location can also be brought onto the dairy farm. GPS drilling allows the crop to be drilled in between last year's crop in this picture. With minimal soil disturbance on arable land, this has allowed crops to be grown in a tighter rotation and avoid soil issues such as take-all and clubroot. This will work particularly well where red clover is used in grassland. Typically, a new lay will be put into 5 or 6 years, but the clover portion will be gone after 3. If after drilling the grass, the clover seed was planted in wide rows, the field could be topped up in between the rows in year 3, so the clover would last the full term of the lay. We'll be trying some of this at home next year. We don't have the technology to use it, but I'm bound to be able to find somebody in this room with that sort of technology. Further work has been done in Australia using injector tankers on dairy farms. As fields are grazed and then left to re-go, the injection of raw slurry adds to the irrigation as well as the nutrition. And we've been trying this at home this year. Some of our grazing area this year, we've only used 125 kilograms of nitrogen, and that's a 34% nitrogen. Grass growth has been down to slurry, a separated liquid. And in July, we were growing 60 kilos of dry matter a hectare. The added advantage of using an injector tanker, particularly on paddocks that we have heavily grazed, is the pats are broken up and they disappear a lot quickly. There are some disadvantages with this machinery. It works very well in the dry, not so well in the wet. And so we may have to do some more work on spring and wet summer applications. But the saving in fertiliser should remain the same. And we're not actually moving any more slurry either. We're only moving it slightly smarter. I believe we probably have a duty to ensure that as a dairy industry we operate practically and responsibly. And legislation that is developed should come from the ground up and not from the government agencies down. We have an ideal opportunity here for arable and dairy industries to take the lead and to work together and prove that best practice comes from a financially viable farm level and not from a European regulation. Thank you very much.